Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a geopolitical update for the strikes on the Houthis by the US and UK air forces. A bit of an explainer, a bit of a debunker of some of the theories as to why it took place, and an explainer as to why I think it took place, which I think those reasons really are fairly obvious if you aren't going to go down your conspiratorial rabbit holes. Let's just look at some of the theories that are floating before I explain kind of what's happened and why I think it's happened. Okay, so we have Congresswoman Cori Bush here being quite wrong, saying the POTUS can't launch airstrikes in Yemen without congressional approval. This is illegal and violates Article 1 of the Constitution. People do not want more of our taxpayer dollars going to endless war and the killing of civilians. Stop the bombing and do better by us. It's actually incorrect. So Congress has, or as the community notes here says, and this is a congresswoman, I think Democratic congresswoman, she's just wrong. Congress has acknowledged the inherent executive power of the president to take military action in response to acts of terrorism in both the War Powers Resolution and the joint resolution passed by Congress on September 14, 2001. So actually they can do that. I think they have to give news of it within 48 hours. Yeah. The War Powers Resolution requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to military action and forbids armed forces from remaining for more than 60 days with a further 30-day withdrawal period without congressional authorization, etc., etc. So that idea is wrong. And John Ridge here says, and for good measure, there is an extremely strong legal case that because the Houthis attacked US forces first, there were strikes that had been taken down, or strikes on, if you like, allied, I don't know if that's the right word, allied naval ships. The War Powers Resolution is inapplicable, and POTUS can order indefinite military action without a declaration of war or authorization for the use of military force. So actually you can take it further and say that they don't even need to kind of go to Congress. You know, they have been attacked, etc., etc. So there is that idea. But you keep hearing things like this. So let it be known tonight that the United States bombed multiple cities in a different country in order to protect Israel from suffering economic damage while it conducted a genocide. And US and UK bombing one of the poorest countries in the world, Yemen, for defending one of the most persecuted people in the world, Palestinians, undergoing a genocide supported by the US and the UK. And then we have Yemen fulfilled their duty under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention to prevent and punish Israel for its genocide. If you don't like Yemen firing at commercial ships, then you shouldn't fire £2,000 bombs at Palestinians. All non-Israeli ships can pass, no problem. It's very simple. I mean, all of these claims are just not true. Yemen has killed no one. They have affected Israel's bottom line in support of Gaza. But two countries whose land does not touch the Red Sea are bombing Yemen to protect Israel's ability to free trade. I just do not understand this response. I mean, goodness me. Luckily, lots of people are calling these kind of opinions out. I disagree. They're protecting vital supply lines that, if disrupted, impact everyone, everywhere. Nonetheless, etc., etc. I mean, a bit of a refinement there. The Houthis have launched 27 attacks on international ships in the Red Sea since mid-November, employing hijacking and firing missiles and explosive-laden drones. They claim that they are targeting Israeli ships where none have had links to Israel. The US warned them for weeks to stop, and there were reports around the world today that a response to Houthi terror was imminent. Okay, so a bit of a corrective there. So what's really going on here? Well, it's useful to understand the world. There are several choke points in the world, and those choke points are regarding international trade. And really, this is all about international trade. You can try and link it to Israel, and that trade will include trade to Israel by necessity. I mean, Israel is fairly nearby. Israel is up here. Trade routes come through. One of the major trade routes of the world comes through this choke point, by Yemen. And we have Djibouti, Eritrea, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia. All these places are nearby. And then up the Red Sea through the Suez Canal and into Europe, right? So these are choke points. Suez Canal and this little neck into the Red Sea here is a huge choke point. There's another choke point just up here by Oman and the UAE, I do believe, and indeed Iran to the north. So that's another choke point. And you get several of these choke points around the world. Now, the issue with the Red Sea is if you cannot send cargo traffic up the Red Sea and into the Mediterranean, then you have to go all the way around Africa. And that comes at a massive cost to the cargo companies. Of course, that's not a cost to the cargo companies because that cost is passed on to all the cargo, to the distributors and the importers and the exporters. And all those costs are passed on who? To the consumer. So in other words, if this is stopped, if the Red Sea is not allowed to be used as a trade route, then that will cause inflation to most of the world's population. Okay, so we'll go and look at the BBC's kind of explainer article. Red Sea attacks could shrink economy, warns the Treasury. It's both an explainer and what our Treasury is saying. So the government is concerned ongoing attacks on shipping in the Red Sea could further shrink the UK economy. This will apply equally to other nations around the world, right? The BBC understands the Treasury has modelled scenarios including crude oil prices rising by more than $10 a barrel and a 25% increase in natural gas. On Thursday night, the UK launched airstrikes against the Houthi rebels. The government fears if the disruption to cargo traffic spreads to tanker traffic, then another energy shock is possible. On Friday, the price of Brent crude, the international benchmark for oil prices, rose by 2%. Per barrel, while US West Texas crude increased by 2.1%. The boss of shipping giant Maersk has also said, quote, significant disruption to global trade was already being felt down to the end consumer. Prior to the military strikes on Thursday, Maersk chief executive Vincent Clerc had called for a, quote, stronger mobilization to repel the attacks, which he said would lead to higher prices for customers. Currently, about a quarter of the world's shipping containers are being diverted from the area. 25% of cargo, and virtually all our cargo goes by ship. Yes, some of it by rail and some of it by air, but generally speaking, ship trade is how you get stuff from A to B around the world. And for a quarter of that to be diverted has massive ramifications. According to the White House, around 15% of global seaborne trade passes through the Red Sea. This includes 8% of global grain, 12% of seaborne oil, and 8% of the world's liquefied natural gas. Currently, traffic is having to take the longer route around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. Tesla, the US electric car maker, has said that it would suspend most of its production at a factory in Berlin after the attacks in the Red Sea led to a shortage of components. Quote, the armed conflicts in the Red Sea and the associated shifts in transport routes between Europe and Asia via the Cape of Good Hope are also having an impact on production in Grünheide, it said. So on and so forth. You've got IKEA, you've got Tesco, you've got all these companies saying this is a real challenge to, well, a challenge to trade and therefore a challenge to economic stability. Okay, so we need to understand that what's going on here is an economic issue. And then we need to understand that our armed forces are the entities that are employed to defend our national interests abroad, which are our economic interests. I wrote an article on this in 2018, and I keep talking about this at the moment because it is still so relevant. The armed forces and their remit, corporations and morality. Why do, in this case, the UK armed forces exist? Well, our own government tell us this. We have 7 military tasks: defending the UK and overseas territories, providing strategic intelligence, providing nuclear deterrence, supporting civil emergency organisations in times of crisis. Okay, fair enough. Then we get onto the key points here. Defending our interests by projecting power strategically and through expeditionary interventions. Providing a defence contribution to UK influence, NATO, and providing security for stabilisation. Okay. Our priorities 2015 to 2020, when I wrote this article, are to protect our people, protect our global influence, promote our prosperity, maintain a strategic base and integrated global support network, and manage the Department of State. Okay, so we are promoting our prosperity by defending our interests and projecting power strategically. Now, that is promoting and protecting our interests, our economic interests. We've got to understand why we have the armed forces. In the 1700s, the Royal Navy was protecting our trade interests going across the Atlantic from the Americas to Europe to the UK. Okay, we were protecting from pirates in the same way that we've been protecting from Somali pirates for the last however many years. This is no different. There are added complications that you can connect the Houthis to Iran, and you can tenuously connect it, therefore, to what's going on in Israel. Some people will say it's just to protect Israeli trade. No, it's to protect global trade. Got to understand this. And so let's have a little bit of an explainer from Frank Gardner, the BBC security correspondent.
Trying to work out what the strategy here is then, because as you say, the Houthis haven't been dissuaded at all, seemingly, by any of this.
Well, ultimately, all roads lead back to Iran on this one. The Houthis are a tribal mountain militia that represent no more than about 15% of Yemenis. And they took over the country illegally in September 2014. And they were able to do that because they teamed up with the forces loyal to the ousted Yemeni president, who was ousted in the Arab Spring, a guy called Ali Abdullah Saleh. They then repaid him by assassinating him. And since then, Iran has supported them because they are fellow Shia as opposed to Sunni Muslims. And they have been able to survive defiantly numerous airstrikes by the Saudis using mostly Western weapons. And Saudi and the UAE have tried to dislodge the Houthis and restore the legitimate UN-recognized government. That hasn't worked. The Houthis have meanwhile built up a very powerful arsenal of weapons, including anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones. The Saudis, who are just to the north of them, massive oil producer, ally of the West and so on, the Saudis are trying to stay out of this because they can't stand the Houthis. They've been fighting them for 7 years, but they've got a tentative truce with them and they don't want to upset that right now. The last thing they want is a bunch more drones and missiles coming back at their cities.
Just quickly, Frank, a lot of listeners, I think.
And that gives you a little bit of an explainer about what's going on. We're going to go to Patrick Bury, who I've referred to before. He was on Times Radio recently. Used to be in the British Army. He's now a lecturer, I believe, in the University of Bath.
Now, the Houthis' stated goal was to disrupt shipping that was providing goods to Israel. But they've not been limiting themselves to ships with an Israeli connection, have they?
They have not, and that's the crucial thing. This is essentially a narrative which the Houthis are spinning out. They've not been very good with their targeting. They've attacked British-flagged ships and numerous other different ones, which aren't on the way to Israel. So they have unfortunately basically been spinning a narrative which doesn't actually match the situation on the ground, the situation with the ships. And I think that's really their aim. Their aim is to stoke, if you look what they're doing, they're selling themselves as allies of the Palestinians. And that's obviously popular, probably amongst their own population and amongst the Arab street as well. So there's a lot of anger out there against the West at the moment on the Arab street, and that they're tapping into that. And
as we've been describing there.
So that is absolutely on the money. So when I look at my Twitter threads, and I've got this spread of views that are really overtly pro-Israeli and really overtly anti-Israeli, pro-Palestine, to the point of being pro-Hamas, I get all these feeds and these voices across the whole spectrum. And I sit somewhere in the middle on the whole Israel-Palestine conflict. However, on this, what Patrick Bury is saying is that the narrative that the Houthis are putting forward is finding its home is really landing on fertile ground with these very pro-Palestine voices. And I'm showing you that here. This is what they're saying. And so they are up in arms about what the US and the UK have done. The US and the UK aren't doing this on behalf of Israel. This is essentially nothing to do with Israel. You can tenuously link it, but it's to do with economics. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand reality. This is what our armed forces are employed to do. And these are just what in philosophy we call this a non sequitur. It just doesn't follow. Like, if you don't like Yemen firing at commercial ships, then you shouldn't fire 2,000 bombs at Palestinians. Those two things are not connected. The Israel firing bombs at the Palestinians is not connected to the UK and the US firing at Yemen, at the Yemenis who are attacking commercial ships. We're doing that to support our economic stability and the global economic stability for who? For the to line the pockets of our nations, but actually so that our own citizens are not hit by inflationary pressures. This is that's how it works. It's how the world works, right? And as I read to you yesterday, the quote from War is a Racket, the anti-war classic by America's most decorated soldier, Smedley D. Butler. Our armed forces, since we started having nationalized armed forces, are in place largely for economic prosperity. We have this intuition that our armed forces go around the world being the global policemen, doing what is morally right, that they are the arbiters of morality around the world, and they're just going around the world doing good. Yeah, they can do that, but they are essentially doing an awful lot to further the political influence of the nation state and to protect and promote and increase the economic prosperity of the nation state and its citizens. That is what is going on here. You can try and confuse it with what is going on in Israel-Palestine, but essentially it's not. There you go. That's my tuppence. Take care. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll speak to you soon.